Greetings, I'm Squid here, and today we're going to talk about domain and range. So I wanted to talk about interval notation as well as standard notation. So remember that the domain of a function are all the possible x values and that the range are all the possible y values. Make sure you remember that, because if you remember that, it's super easy, and if you don't, you have no idea what you're doing. So we want to always remember domain is x values, range is y values. So there's this standard notation, and that I'm going to call it, I hope that's the right name, and then there's interval notation. Definitely know that one. So if I was just saying that my domain is all the numbers between -3 and 14, that would be a continuous domain. Remember, discrete is just a bunch of separate points, but a continuous domain means all the real numbers between two things or beyond one thing. I would write it like this: -3 is less than x, is less than or equal to 14. If I knew that they were all the numbers greater than 16, including 16, I would write it like this: x is greater than or equal to 16. And if it was all real numbers, I'd write all real numbers. However, if it's an interval notation, then we write it a little differently. You can see it's kind of easy. You've got to be careful that you don't mistake it for a point. Remember, a point has two parentheses with a comma in between. So you really have to know your context. What are you actually talking about? It's kind of like if I said, what is red? What's the word red mean? Well, you wouldn't know unless I said if you knew it was a color, or if I was talking about reading a book, because red can mean two different things. So parentheses and commas can mean two different things. So over here, I wrote that we use these square brackets when we're including the point. We write parentheses when we're not including the point. And this little symbol, this kind of sideways number 8, is the infinity symbol, and sometimes you use that. So right here, this is the same thing, all the numbers between -3 and 14, including 14. That's what this means. The parenthesis tells me -3 isn't included. The square bracket tells me 14 is included. This one, it says x is greater than or equal to 16. So the square bracket tells me 16 is included. And then it goes all the way up to infinity. And since infinity is a concept and not an actual number, we put a parenthesis, because it doesn't include infinity, because you can't really include a concept. And it's only going to help with numbers. And then, of course, all real numbers, this is the way you can write it. So that says from -infinity to positive infinity. So forever, both directions, it includes everything. So those are our symbols. Now we're going to go about writing the domain and range for these graphs using those. So we'll do both notations, okay? So here we're going to do domain. We're going to write it both ways, and we'll do range over here. So the domain of this is, okay, that's my x values. So my leftmost point is at -2. My rightmost point goes forever. So I know that x is always greater than or equal to -2. Now this says -2 is less than or equal to x. You can also write it x is greater than or equal to -2. But I usually start it like that, because if I have a compound inequality, then I'd like my last number to be over there. How would I write that in interval notation? Well, the -2 is included, so I have to do that little guy. And I use my leftmost point on the left, and then my largest point on the right. And since my largest point is infinity, and then I use a parenthesis. Okay, it looks a little blurry. I'm not sure why. So that's better. So on range, it's all about y. So I look for my point that's down the lowest. It looks like 1. Here it's 1, and there it's 1. So y is greater than or equal to 1. I could write it like that. Or I could say 1 is less than or equal to y. Or that's an or. Or if I was using interval notation, I would say that would be a square bracket at 1 and goes on to infinity, because that arrow tells me it goes up and right forever. Okay, let's see. This one looks like a vertical line. So the domain is only, right? The domain is only 6. So I would say x equals, and I would use my little braces, 6. Now, interval notation, 6 is included. It is 6. So I could just say square bracket 6. I don't know if anyone actually writes it like that, but anyway, that's interval notation. It goes from 6 to 6. Let's see. If we were writing Oh, I wrote all my domain there. So we'll go this way. Range, then my range starts at 15, not including 15, and goes all the way down. So I would say y is less than 15. Or if I was using interval notation, I'd say negative infinity. And then it goes up to 15, but is not included. 15 is not included. That's why I would use the 2 parentheses. All right, next one. So my domain, you can't really see these numbers here. So this is a 2, so it's counting every little 2 grids. So I'm going to help you there. 1, 2, 3, 4. There we go. Okay, so my domain would be anything from 2 to 5. So one way I could write that is 2 is less than x is less than 5, but those 2 numbers are included because we have the solid dot. Or if I was using interval notation, I'd use the brackets, the square brackets, and I do it like that. So my range then would be anything between, looks like 0 and 4. So I would say 0, 4 is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to 4. And if I was writing my interval notation, I would use my square brackets and say from 0 to 4. And there that one is. Okay, this little segment here. So my domain would be anything between 2 and 4, including 2 and 4. And I would write that, whoops, square bracket, 2 comma 4. And my range would be anything between, looks like 0 and negative 1. So negative 1 is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to 0. And for interval notation, I would say negative 1 comma 0. Okay, let's try a few more. But now I want to remind you about discrete and continuous. We talked about this a little bit. So continuous domain means it includes all the real numbers between any set of numbers, or just in general all real numbers. Or anytime you have like a y is greater than 5, or an x. We'll do a domain for this one. X is less than, like if I said negative 3 and 7. These are continuous because it includes all the numbers between those, or all the numbers that are bigger than this. Whereas a discrete domain, it just includes a set of points. It doesn't include any point between those 2 points. So just keep that in mind, because on this next one we're also going to talk about what's discrete and continuous. So we're going to talk about domain and range, but we're also going to say is it discrete or continuous. So for this one, what's our domain? Our domain is just this. Now we don't write that in interval notation because it's not an interval. So if you have a discrete domain, we're not going to use interval notation. So we're just going to say the domain. Remember, you write them in the braces. We're going to say, and we usually write them in order, so negative 2, 3, 4, and 10. That would be my domain. And then my range is over here. My range would be negative 7, 2, 8, and 11 with the little braces. Same thing over here. No interval notation needed because it's discrete. It's just 4 points. So I'm going to say it is, for the domain, it is negative 4, 0, and 8. And for my range, it is negative 6, 1, 2, and 3. So that would be my range and my domain. And I don't know if you remember about the function, but this is not a function because 2 x's have different y's. This one, all the x's had exactly 1 y. It doesn't matter if the x goes to the same y, it has exactly 1 y. Just throwing that in there. Okay, I don't know if you can see this little grid, but it looks like each little thing is 1. So this right here is 1. It looks like it goes up to 1. And then you can't see it. It doesn't show it, but those are arrows going down forever. So when I talk about my domain, again, this is going to be interval notation because this is definitely continuous. There's not just a set of points. So it looks like my domain is going left forever and right forever. So I would say all real numbers. If you want to write that in interval notation, remember it's going to be negative infinity to positive infinity. And if I was going to do my range, there's actually a point where it starts and then it goes down forever. So that little part is 1. So we would say y is less than or equal to 1. And if I was going to write that in interval notation, I would say negative infinity because it goes down forever. And then square bracket with the 1 because it includes that one. Okay, this one you see we have a closed circle and an open circle. So when we do our domain and range, we're going to either have the square bracket and the parenthesis, or we'll have a less than and equal to and a less than. Okay, so for domain, we'll do domain first. Leftmost point looks like -5, rightmost point looks like 6. So we would say -5 and 6, less than or equal to on the -5, just a less than on the 6, and then our x is in the middle. If we were going to do that in interval notation, remember anytime you see the equals or equals, we get a bracket. And then if not, we have a parenthesis. And for range, we are going to have the upmost point looks like 2, and the lowest looks like -6. So we'd say -6. It includes both of those. It hits both of those, so we are going to say and equal to, or equal to, I should say. And what did I say? 2. And so we have 2 brackets over here. We'd say -6 and 2. Okay? So this again is discrete. So we would just write it. This look is not a function, right? We still have a domain and range because it's a relation, but it's not a function because that 3 goes to 2 different ones. So our domain would be 1, 3, 4, and 9, and our range would be -1. Sorry, -5 is before it, -5, and then 2 and 3. Try to write those in order. Is this a function? Well, it looks like it's a function. Is it discrete or continuous? Well, it's a bunch of points, so it's discrete. So again, I'm going to write it like this. So it looks like -5, 0, 2, 3, 4, and 5 is my domain. And my range then would be, let's see, looks like -1, 1, and then 2, and then 3. Again, if they repeat, we don't write them again. So there's 2 1s, we don't write them again. There's 2 2s, we don't write them twice, because once is enough, as my grandfather always used to say. Okay, here we go. Discrete or continuous? Continuous. It's not just a set of points. Discrete or continuous? Discrete, continuous. Okay, so let's find the domain and range. These 2 are our last ones. Let's go. So leftmost point looks like -2. Closed circles on all of them. And rightmost point looks like a 1 for our x. So, well, I won't do that. Sometimes we do those braces things. Interval notation. So we have our brackets because it was included. And then our lowest point looks like a -1. Our highest point looks like a 4. So -1 is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to 4. And then square brackets, -1, 4. Yeah, sometimes we write those little braces there too, but I'm not going to be picky about that. Okay, it's discrete. We already decided that. Now this one is a little trickier because you don't have the points, so we have to look for the points. So if I'm going to do my domain, I just go my left. It's not a function, right? Vertical line test says it's not a function, but still it's at -2, and then at 1, and then at 2. And then it looks like over here it's 6. So that would be my domain. Again, we don't use interval notation because it's discrete. My range then would be the lowest point looks like -5, then -1. Then it looks like we have a 2 and 2 3s, so 2 and 3. Alrighty, that is domain and range with interval notation and standard notation, and then a little review of that discrete and continuous. Good luck with that. M squared signing out.